Morning, can you hear me okay? Jim, can you hear me? So thanks very much for inviting me to talk. I'm excited to be here. Hello 3D people, hello 2D people. I'm not quite sure where to look to see the 2D people. Got my clicker. So I'm going to be talking about emoji as paralanguage and introducing a model that Lorenzo and I have been working hard on for the last year and a half. And also I'm going to be talking about the role that emoji play in enacting ambient affiliation on social media. So there's Lorenzo and I in our emoji incarnation working hard on this book that hopefully will be out sometime next year. But I probably should have visualized myself like this because you might have seen me doing this all day at the back. Writing this book has destroyed my back. And so I've been actually trying to work on it while walking. And actually, Aristotle was onto something. Walking and thinking is really good. It helps you generate good ideas. So walking makes you happy and is good for thinking. And cats are good co-workers when they're not sitting on your keyboard. And obviously I'm playing here, but hopefully this gives you a little bit of insight into the kinds of functions that emoji can have in relation to their co-text. So in the work that Lorenzo and I have been doing, we've been working with a number of corpora. And I won't explain the size or parameters of the corpora because that's not the main function of my talk today. I'm not going to be dealing in great detail with frequencies or anything like that, but I'll just give you a taste of the three corpora. So the Sydney emoji corpus was collected from unsuspecting undergraduate students at UNSW, across various social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, etc. We also collected some of their text messages. We did have ethics mission to do this. Another corpus, which those of you who know me know that I like to write about my obsession with coffee and how we bond through coffee discourse. So I collected a corpus of the hot beverage emoji. So here focusing on a single emoji. And then also a corpus of work from home tweets. So people working from home expressing their joy or frustration, depending on how much they like their colleagues, about being at home, being separated physically from their co-workers. So here we're trying to focus on a single field of experience on a single platform. Okay, so all of these are feeding into our model or giving us a playground to work out what's going on with emoji in terms of how they relate to the text that they're embedded in. And why am I doing this? Well, because I'm, as Lorenzo mentioned, interested in how people create alignments, how they disagree, how they interact on social media. So ambient affiliation. And also trying to draw in some other work that I've been doing with Jim and Yagan on tenor relations. So my goal is to be able to understand both, and I know perhaps it sounds a little tautological, dialogic affiliation, where people are interactively negotiating meanings, interactively negotiating couplings. And here in this talk, I'll be working with a TikTok corpus, a hotel quarantine food review TikTok comment corpus. What on earth is that? It's people, specifically this is about New Zealand quarantine, where your delivered food in your room comes in a paper bag at the door. Some people just eat it. Some people film unpacking it and talk about the food and then was it good? Is it what they expected, etc. And then people comment on this. So very interactive discourse. And then also looking at communing affiliation through a Twitter corpus. So you might remember back to one of the phases in the pandemic where we decided to move away from an elimination strategy. And people were worried about this, complaining about this. So essentially critiquing the premier still the premier, Domicron, or Dominic Peritet, sorry, let it rip corpus. Okay, so why bother modeling emoji text relations? Why would I start there? Well, in order to answer this, I'm going to kind of draw on a Janus metaphor. So looking both ways at once. As a metaphor for looking across simultaneous dimensions at once, which is something we do all the time as discourse analysts. Depending on how good a discourse analyst you are, maybe you can hold 3, 4, 5, 6 dimensions in your head at one time. I'm not sure I can do that. So wanting to be able to look from the perspective of looking at the text, so relations that emoji can have with their co-text, and relations that they can have with images, with hashtags, with GIFs, with all kinds of other paralanguage inside the world of social media. But then also wanting to be able to understand relations with the play of bonds in exchanges, or the play of couplings in exchanges. The reason that arrow is tilted, as my husband usefully pointed out, if you have 2 arrows going this way, it's only 1 dimension. So we've moved it, and this is 2 dimensions. So from the perspective of text, looking at, for instance, how emoji harmonize washing interpersonal meaning backwards over a text. They can actually wash it back and forth, but most often are washing it backwards. And then also thinking about how they tender, render, tune, position meanings in monologue, dialogue, or multilog, polylog, some people call it. Here drawing in some of the ideas that Jim and Jagan and I have been working on. So in essence, why you can't just read that as a happy emoji, because it's always construing both attitude and enacting solidarity at the same time. Okay, so if you don't analyze this first, you'll be at risk of doing a common sense analysis of this, which is really bad as a discourse analyst, isn't it? Okay. Another reason for doing this is to lay an adequate foundation for exploring the layers of complex intermodal relations that characterize digital discourse, that characterize social media discourse in particular. So here's me. I was really excited when I had my first COVID vaccine, and a selfie that I posted on Facebook. Looking at the emoji here, I've got a kind of proliferation of object emoji at the end of my text, expressing my happiness. Needing to deal with all of these kinds of relations. So emoji, through their paralinguistic relation with the co-text, are involved in all these other kinds of relations. So complex relations with images, GIFs, reaction stickers, intertextual references. So some of you might know the Jimmy Kimmel videos on YouTube. They're very, very funny. If you don't, you can find them. So wanting to look at ambient affiliation, drawing on a model that we've been developing on emoji text relations, bringing in a model of tenor, but wanting to think about emoji as paralanguage, as a paralinguistic resource used in digital discourse in the service of affiliation. So if I didn't have enough models going on, here's another one that I've been involved with, working with a number of people that are here on looking at how we can model emoji as social sematicians, not emoji, paralanguage. So I'm interested in how ambient affiliation operates, how people forge and contest, or how personae forge and contest social bonds in terms of affiliation, and how they generate, maintain, or dissolve social relations in terms of tenor. So affiliation, although it sounds positive, also implies the reverse, where things are falling apart, as they often are on social media. So here's a brief technical interlude, just to explain what emoji actually are in terms of processes of character encoding and rendering. I just have a couple of slides. So technically speaking, emoji are Unicode. I mean, all the text that you read inside, to say a word processing document, are Unicode. And they're numerical values written in hexadecimals with a U+ used to indicate that they're part of the Unicode standard. So this is a standard developed by the Unicode Consortium for making sure that characters are interoperable across different information systems, essentially. So Unicode code points can be stored in a file or sent over a network in a number of different encodings. So we can use encoding as a noun and a verb, and it makes it a little bit confusing when you look at UTF. So an example of these encodings is UTF-8 and UTF-16, each of which have a different representation when converted to bytes. So the code point for the hot beverage emoji that you can see on the screen here is U+2615, which is represented in UTF-8 as the hex sequence E29895, which corresponds to the binary numbers that are shown on the screen on the left. Yes. So how they're stored on disk. Decoding reads those bytes and converts them back to the code point when the software reads the file. Okay, so that's encoding how the emoji are actually encoded as using the Unicode. Another process is rendering. So this is how the Unicode actually comes to be the characters that you see on the screen, the emoji that you see on the screen, which look different depending on how you're accessing them. So you might send an emoji to someone through, I don't know, Gmail, and they've got those funny ones that look like little potato people, and then they might receive it in another way and see something else, depending on what's happening. So this is rendering. So expressing the code point as a glyph, enabling the kind of visual typography that we're used to inside different platforms. Okay, so that's important to understand this distinction because it affects what's your actual objects of study. So Unicode does not standardize the graphics for emoji characters. So you can see some examples of all of the same emoji across what Unicode calls vendors, Apple, Google, etc. And these are always evolving. So there's different versions and these decisions are made by designers. Okay. So back to emoji text relations. So thinking about emoji as paralanguage. Why paralanguage? Because they're so heavily dependent, you'll see this in the examples, on the cotext as a clear verbal anchorage, since they are rarely completely unambiguous and instead variable and determined by the context, at times requiring degrees of familiarity with cultural conventions and knowledge from Eastern and Western written and gestural languages, sign languages, and even fictional communication systems. So how can we model paralanguage? Well, we have a model offered here in this book, a social semiotic model developed for work on embodied paralanguage, so gesture, posture, all the things I'm doing up here in my three-dimensional form. But specifically, in terms of emoji, I'm not taking the step that Grain and McCulloch do of directly analogizing emoji with just say gesture, because emoji have their own affordances. They can do their own stuff as picture characters. So picture characters in the sense that I explained when I explained the technical part of how emoji operate. So different sets of affordances. So drawing on another kind of metaphor, a metaphor of a convex of lens that's used in the work on paralanguage that I just mentioned, thinking about the cotext and the emoji and how they work together, the idea of converging meaning. So converging ideational meaning or concurring, converging interpersonal meaning, resonating, and converging textual meaning, synchronizing. Okay, so this is a network that Lorenzo and I have been working on and reworking and thinking, can we even network this? And then reworking it again for looking at how emoji and text work together. So the entry criteria here would be an emoji text relation. And I'm not going to step through, excuse me, every part of the network because that would be really boring. I'll just take you through the first level of delicacy just to show you what we mean. But before I do that, I'll introduce some of the modeling principles, i.e. how do we establish that there even is a relation between the emoji and the cotext. So as you would have heard Lorenzo mention in his Friday talk, emoji have no syntagmatic resources to explicitly link them to other semiotic resources, like they don't have word order or conjugation like language does. So how do we decide what's interacting with what? So which emoji interact with which stretches of language? Because posts will typically have a number of emoji. Often they'll have as you saw in my post, a concentration of lots of emoji at the end of the text. So we use the principle of proximity. Is the emoji close to the co-text in the logogenetic unfolding? Usually that is an indicator that there's a relation. Relation of minimum mapping, and here we're drawing on the work of Simin Zhao, she was looking specifically at ideation, text-image relations, and what principle can you use for establishing those relations. She had an idea of a minimum mapping hypothesis. So in our context, can emoji and their co-text be constrained to a shared region of meaning potential when they come together? And the last one of prosodic segmentation, do the emoji and the co-text travel together prosodically? For example, you see something in some of the texts I'll show you, an oscillating back-forth appraisal prosody. Okay, so they were our principles. So looking at along ideational dimension, at concurrence, ideational concurrence, emoji can be involved in a depict relation. Excuse me. Depiction is concerned with how emoji concur with the co-text to express, at the level of field, multimodal items and activities within a domain of experience. So relatively congruent relations in this sense. So an example text, good morning so far. Got some dividend love, I'm not sure what that is. Maybe this is a person, a trader. Bought some future freedom, walked the dog, so there's a dog emoji, and having a cup of coffee, hot beverage emoji. Good start to the day. Okay, so here, thank you, Shushi, you're always so kind. You can tell I'm losing my voice. Can I open it and not spill it on the computer? Okay, thank you. Yeah. Hello, Jody. What are you laughing off, Jennifer? Okay, anyway, where was I? Depiction. So here, an instance of illustration. It's fine. Depiction of thing entities in this case, looking at the level of discourse semantics, okay, interpreting these relations along those lines. So here we're using two modeling principles, the proximity one, can't see under Margot's comment. Okay, minimum mapping, classification, exemplification, depending if you're looking from text to emoji or emoji to text. That was something that Simin struggled with when looking at image text relations. Okay, so that was a relatively congruent choice. More incongruent choice is along ideational lines is where emoji embellish. So activating figurative meanings that are incongruent with the co-text. So metonymy, synecdoche, all of those things that we learn in school that I always can never remember which is which, emblems, etc. So a text like this, spawning book files, I'm not at work today, etc., etc. So here, obviously, a bookophile is a person who likes books, not a book. So you can see the relation there. Breakfast, well, that could be the actual breakfast that that person ate. They may have literally had bacon and eggs, or it could just be the idea of breakfast, so more of a metonymic relation. Here, it's far too entertaining knowing things, and I probably shouldn't, and just sitting back and letting the universe do its thing with a hot beverage emoji. Here, the emoji is functioning like an emblem, so spilling the tea, kind of gossipy meaning, and you see this over and over again, activating a whole range of cultural meanings that I don't have time to deal with, but I dealt with a bit in my Friday talk. Okay. And then interpersonal resonance, so imbuing. This is where emoji infuse the co-text with interpersonal meaning. So for instance, targeting attitude at ideation. So 21 people have died, and then this emoji sequence, and then a sequence of hashtags. Okay, so here, so that emoji sequence is targeting, to say, attitude, coupling attitude with the ideation. Alternatively, and in a mesh relation where emoji interweave with the interpersonal meanings in the co-text. So a text like this, good morning, my dear friend. Oh, that's really a pity, et cetera, et cetera. So here you can see happy emoji, flowers, coffee. Well, it's not coffee, it's a hot beverage of indeterminate hot beverage, washing over the cotext, more negative, more positive. So they're kind of oscillating prosody, and the emoji go along with that. Okay, here we've used a couple of principles, but mainly the principle of prosodic segmentation. Thinking textually along textual lines, synchronicity. So emoji can be inset. So emoji realize roles in the discourse semantics, they're inside the text. So thing entities inside figures, for instance. And then if you took away the emoji, you would break the coherency of the text and the reader. So the reader has to actively transduct emoji into language in order to complete the text. So an example, take some hot beverage and something in return. So coffee, croissant, how would you read this text aloud? And probably depends if you're a tea or a coffee drinker in that kind of semantic priming sense. Okay, then the alternative is to where emoji punctuate the text. So they sit outside the discourse semantic structure in some sense. For instance, operating as effectual punctuation, which resonates interpersonal meaning across the scope of each preceding figure. So an example like this, you're just plain boring. I can't wait to catch up, man. Sorry, I couldn't make it to falls. Missing you heaps, etc. Okay. So these emoji are acting kind of like punctuation. All right. So the point is to understand, well, that's interesting in itself to me, but the point is to understand how emoji are working in the service of affiliation. So I mentioned at the beginning the TikTok hotel quarantine food review corpus, okay, where we're talking about the food where people are discussing the food that someone was brought and they're inside hotel quarantine. And the meanings that are at stake in this TikTok comment corpus are things like, is Snickers a legitimately popular chocolate bar? Is it okay to use hot water on Weet-Bix? Is hotel quarantine jail? Can I eat a lot and still be a worthwhile human? And generally it's a lighter context than the other corpus. So lots of hugging and tempering through laughing off. And we'll look at examples of that. Omicron is a bit angrier. Okay, the meaning at stakes here. A politician's competent. A politician's running a death cult. Do we care about our elders? Is capitalism bad? Okay, and there are many, many values that are being negotiated. These are just some of them. You can get a sense from the most frequent emoji that there's probably going to be a bit of censure and ridicule in this corpus. So in terms of the model of tenor that I'm drawing on work that I've been doing with Jim and Yagan. And here this perspective is, as Jim puts it, looking at the relation of a culture to the persona which member it, in terms of the way semiotic resources are allocated to personae and the way they use these resources to affiliate along a cline ranging through smaller coterie of shared values and on to large ones engendered by bonds associated with what we think of as class, generation, gender, and ethnicity. Our ultimate aim in this book is to develop a model of tenor realization which accounts for the contribution interpersonal meaning makes to negotiating relationships, instantiation, by way of membering communities into culture. Okay. So this is how we have been beginning to network these really difficult to understand tenor relations. I'm just going to give you a taste of this. I'm not going to explain the entire network because it's kind of beyond the scope of what we're doing here, but just loosely or lightly, negotiating, which I think Yagan has said may need to be renamed, but at this point is negotiating, resources for putting forward and reacting to meanings So rendering or tendering meanings, looking through the lens of tenor. Positioning is about resources for organizing meanings in relation to each other. So from the perspective of affiliation, bond complexing. So for instance, just say in this little world of this TikTok food review discourse, we might be rallying around a configuration of bonds, in this case about New Zealand hotel quarantine. So about how good the food is, what a nice nation New Zealand is, etc. Okay, so that might be the interpersonal background against which someone might play a bond like this. So a bad US bond, America would never. And in terms of positioning, in terms of how these meanings are being arranged and configured, there's an oppositioning. Tuning, kind of moving the interpersonal dial, are resources for adjusting meaning by lowering or raising stakes, modifying the spirit, or adjusting the scope. Okay, so an example here, that's 11 more, and then 11 coffin emoji from the Domicron corpus. Say that we're raising the stakes here. We're laying out each coffin in this text. And I guess here I should mention the cuteness factor of emoji and the cute aesthetic, kawaii aesthetic. Maybe that would cause you to think, well, you're not really raising the stakes here. You've just put someone's died and you've put a coffin emoji on Twitter. Well, this kind of tuning is always contextually modulated and influenced by the available choices inside a particular semiotic technology. What resources do you have to express the meanings you want to express? There's not that many ways you can do it on Twitter. I mean, obviously you have all the resources of language, but in terms of more visual meanings, emoji, GIFs, you can stick images inside your tweet. You can do hashtags. It's a constrained environment. There's a lot of interpersonal pressure on language and other resources. Okay. So we're tendering and rendering meanings. I'm going to talk in terms of affiliation. So tendering and rendering couplings, or in thinking it along the social dimension, bonds. So if we choose to address these meanings, we can either support or reject them, and either do this in a way that directly confers this support or rejection. So what Naomi Knight, and I wish she was still here with us, she's in Canada selling property, calls communing and condemning affiliation. We can defer it through laughter. These resources together allow us to negotiate meanings in dialogue in a way that allows us to enact our social relations in a nuanced way. And you can see a blue cross classification here, which Yagan deftly came up with. So you can confer support, commune. You can defer support and laugh with. You can confer reject, so condemn, or you can defer reject, laugh at. So I'll try to use these. So an example here where the TikToker and other users are rallying around a good food bond. Okay, so you can see I think it's her dinner here with salmon and potatoes and some green stuff. So use one, okay, here we are, salmon, broccolini, potatoes. That's good food. I know. Nice AF. It was so good. Right. So we're tendering language, a good food bond. The emoji are harmonizing, resonating across the text. They're coordinating interpersonally. There's an allusion here, so I know it's good food. We're also rendering, conferring support, communing around this good food bond. In the reply here, we are then conferring some more support on this rendering, ultimately at this good food bond. It was so good. Again, here, the smiling face with hearts. And I have to put the little glosses there because I can never remember what all the different ones are called because there's such a proliferation of emoji, face emoji. There's lots of different smileys and frownies. So it was so good, resonating, harmonizing. Also, again, conferring support, communing. So we've got enough back and forth for volley, I suppose, to use a tennis metaphor. I don't play tennis. You nodded, so that's okay, right? We're rallying. Okay. In terms of, so it's through the emoji text relations that this is possible. An example here of rallying around a shared complaint about bad bosses and bad nations. So in the US, they'll be like, you're still coming to work, right? My old boss literally made people who had COVID come into work. We had to work while we were being confirmed with COVID, face with rolling eyes. What the hell? Enraged face? Ugh. This is also the UK, but seriously, not false. Okay, so we're tendering a bad boss bond. We are here imbuing with the face with rolling eyes. My son does a lot of rolling eyes as a teenager, so every time I see this emoji, I think of him. So we're targeting that at the text, the situation in the text, the sequence of figures. And we're also conferring support on this bad boss bond. Okay. The next move, we're resonating, harmonizing the enraged face across the negativity in the co-text. We're also conferring support on the what's happening there with the face with rolling eyes. And again, targeting interpersonal meaning at a situation, at a figure. At the same time here, because the laughter is coming after the person's own proposition, I would read this as more of a stakes lowering, tempering move here. And then the laughter response, I would read this one more as a deferring support, laughing with. Okay. And then, but seriously, not false, conferring support on this bad boss bond, raising the stakes, but seriously, so in opposition to the non-serious emoji, and in terms of positioning, oppositioning. Okay, so again, there's rallying here. They're not always just rallying around nice things. Also, I've got examples of laughing off a desire to quarantine. So these are isolated examples that I've picked out that come throughout the unfolding feed. So what are they? Why are these laughter tokens? So in terms of the interpersonal resonance, we kind of move through the text and bounce back, rebound. There's a subversion of the meaning here. So do they really want to quarantine? Kind of laughing that off, aren't they? Deferring support. This quarantine was not typically something we're supposed to desire. So laughing off desire to quarantine. And why are they doing this? In terms of thinking about personae and how they play out bonds across communities. They seem to be performing this kind of quirky persona. You'll see this replayed across different kinds of communities. So here, you know, I'm so quirky, I would really like to quarantine because, I don't know, maybe there's another bond coming in, I'm a foodie. Maybe that's what's happening for user 5. But for us as academics, I guess it would be when people talk about, you know, how much they enjoy working on the weekend or the kind of overwork bond. It's difficult to pick out, but you see it playing again and again and again across communities. Also had some examples that align nicely with Naomi Knight's research into conversational humour and negotiation of gendered bonds about appearance. So you can see here an example from her data. Affiliation, amongst young female university students discussing going home, eating too much pie, feeling bad about it and laughing. Okay, so ate well, we all ate well, they laugh. Jude, we laughing, ate good pie, all laugh. Yes, I disagree, on a diet, laughing now, all laugh. Okay, so Naomi was careful to separate out affiliation as a bond process, a social variable, from affiliation as a textual process, a play of couplings. Here she's interpreting incommensurate bonds from a social perspective, enacting a wrinkle in terms of the unfolding text. So a collision between a happy fatness bond and a beautiful thinness bond. Okay, so as she terms it, a happy fatness bond instantiated as the coupling ideation, eating, attitude, positive appreciation. It's a token of affect. This wrinkles with a shared, I can't see it, implied beautiful thinness bond commensurate with other body conscious values that they share, and the tension generated by this wrinkle is discharged through laughter. So that's how she's interpreting the laughter here. Okay, so something like this. So in my data, came back to see how much you had put away for dinner, the portions, and that's a hushed face. It was a lot, but I was very happy to try this. I love fish. It looks so delicious. See, this is why I'm fat. Hey, as long as you're happy. Okay. So imbuing, tendering a bad big portions bond, conferring support, tendering a happy self bond that's in terms of positioning is opposing that other bond. An instant here of harmonizing and tendering another good food bond. Harmonizing, conferring support. But have we done too much bonding over food? Is this still okay? Well, this person felt, this is the TikToker, felt the need to tend to this fat self bond. Okay. The laughter here seems to be lowering the stakes. Oops. But the laughter here seems to be targeting the previous text. Okay. Tendering a happy self, but deferring a fat self. So what seems to be going on here in the play of bonds, play of meanings, excuse me, it's okay to be fat as long as you're happy, so aligning with a beautiful thinness bond. So similar to Naomi's data, perhaps. Interesting to think about what that hey is doing there too. Is it kind of consoling, implies that it's actually really bad? I haven't figured that out yet exactly. So hopefully by this point, I've shown you why you can't just read the tenor relations via the emoji without doing the work of looking at the emoji text relations first. Just like you can't read the meaning of any emoji by their common locale data repository names, the names that are assigned to them in Unicode and the structure that's assigned to them in Unicode. Okay, this is one of my favorite examples, but it's also really hard to analyze, and I don't know if I've got it right or not. It's jail, but it's nice with the sparkles emoji. And the TikToker says, nothing like jail, but your ignorance is nice with the sparkles emoji. Yeah. There's a harmonizing here. Does the butt act like what? It's either Jim or Sue called a prosody blocker, I'm not sure. So we're tendering a bad quarantine bond. Here we're in the space of moralizing, I think. So, but then we're tendering a good quarantine bond. We're in the space of aestheticizing. We're doing an opposition here. And we're conferring rejection, a bad quarantine bond here. The sparkles emoji is harmonizing across the text. Tabling a bad you. But also confer reject. So the imitation of the opposition plus the emoji, plus the reversal of polarity, the grammatical parallelism here as well. Kind of doing parody that is in that sparkles emoji and its relation to the co-text. So why do the sparkles make the rejection more cutting? They really, for me, as I read it, they make it more cutting. And it's also an example here of, where cute doesn't mean kind. So it's a cute emoji, but it's not being cute. How do we reason about the apparent condescending tone here in this kind of parodic parallelism? And kind of, it's interesting how that sparkles emoji can kind of do a tender render all at once via its relation with the co-text. Okay. Also positioning here, an instance. So welcome to New Zealand. We're glad to have you. I'm a citizen, so I would hope so. Ouch. So harmonizing. And we have here the kiwi fruit and the flag New Zealand emoji concurring through embellishing. So they're emblems. So we know this is about New Zealand people. So we're tendering a welcome you. We're warming. We're, in terms of the positioning, we're sourcing. Okay, so it's the we here that are glad to have you. And we're collectivizing. It's New Zealanders. Okay, so in the response, we have an imbue relation here. And we also have a lowering of the stakes. Again, it's what people in pragmatics might think of through politeness. So this is really awkward, and we're kind of adjusting that. We're warming, and we're defer reject. Okay, so she is a New Zealander. All right. An example here of communing around shared complaint. So harmonizing, the enraged space harmonizing. Tendering a bad politician bond. This is tendered over and over and over and over again in this corpus. Warning and raising stakes. Okay. So harmonizing. Another example with the same kind of patterning. And the flag here again, functioning as an emblem in relation to these hashtags that have particular functions that I can't go into right now. Okay, so we're convoking, mustering. And in terms of ambient affiliation, we're communing via shared complaint, which is a kind of repeated meta pattern across social media. People like to bond about all the things that are wrong in the world. And just, I think this is my final example. I just wanted to show you that it's not always emoji that are sitting outside the discourse semantic structure in a certain sense that are doing this. So here we've got an example in terms of textual meaning where the emoji are inset into the figure, but they're still doing this kind of imbuing. Okay, so I don't know how to read that. It doesn't correspond to any lexis here, but positive, good feeling to all the healthcare workers. So you would have seen examples of people posting these kinds of things during the early phases of the pandemic. So tendering a good healthcare worker bond, warming and convoking. Okay, so conclusion is my flushed face, worried face. Hopefully I've convinced you that there's value in looking at the emoji text relations in terms of concurrence, resonance, and synchronicity, and that this is helpful for thinking about the work, the interpersonal work that emoji are doing in terms of tenor and also in terms of ambient affiliation, and that there's enough payoff for doing both of these things at once. Thanks.